good afternoon for most of us who are in the Asian side of the world, and maybe good morning to the people who are to the west of us, and good night to the people who are further west of that. So, welcome to the seminars which have been organized by Pro Musicals. Of course, a lot of people know Sudhin directly, and his company, which has been working in the audio distribution and helping people out with the audio equipment in India in a really very long time. A lot of people have bought equipment from him, and so this seminar comes as an introduction to an amazing line of work which has been put out over a period of time by SPL. I know a lot of people think SPL is whatever we think sound pressure level, but that's the kind of connect you immediately have that it's an audio company, which is great. And I think that's why they kept it like that. But the lab is where all the action happens, as we all know, as far as audio is concerned, definitely. And we have the person here who drives that lab. And that is none other than the co-founder, Mr. Hermann Gier himself. We are seeing sitting there with a lot of nice toys behind him, and we've been having a little chat about those toys, and some of them he is not telling us what they are. So I think we'll just have to wait and watch. Meanwhile, we also have Xavier, who is handling sales with SPL, and he's sitting in his house. He's not telling us where it is because he have to kill all of us if he tells us. So I guess we are not going to ask. It looks like a beautiful, nice, warm place in France somewhere. So be it. Xavier, welcome. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking time.
Oh, thank you.
And, sharing so much information with all of us out here. I know it's the time of the pandemic, but maybe it's a blessing in disguise in a certain way that we are getting to meet online, which we earlier would not have maybe thought of, though it was always available to us. So great going that we have access to Hermann himself, the maker of all these toys that we enjoy so much. So all of the guys who have used it. I remember seeing the first tube vitalizer and the vitalizer and was actually struck by it. I mean, what does this device do? Nobody named a device like a vitalizer before this. So what the hell is this? And then you start tweaking those knobs. And as with any audio guy, you only hear it when you tweak those knobs. Otherwise, nothing's really going to happen out of it. And once you start tweaking them, you realize, oh, interesting things are happening. You start A-Bing things and you realize, now suddenly I have this entire expression coming out at me from either a mix or a track. And vitalizer is what the medical term would mean. It vitalizes your audio. So great. I mean, that was my first introduction to his products. Of course, later on, the mix stream stuff has happened. I've been through some part of that with AR installing it, I remember. That's the first time I saw that mix stream thing, and it was pretty fascinating to see the summing thing coming through that. So yes, and of course, in their plugins, I've personally had a lot of joy coming out of the Transient Designer. That's another one of beautiful products that he has out there. So before getting carried away, I can get emotional about these guys, so forgive me. I would like to pass on to Hermann to talk about some of the inventions and technologies that SPL has been a very, very, very strong part of and contributor to the audio industry worldwide. And some of the patents that he holds and some of the technologies behind these products. I mean, what one made him go for that? And secondly, if for people like us who are audio engineers want to get into the nitty-gritty, gets a hand dirty and figure out what's going on. So thank you very much to everybody for being here. And I hope everybody has had their lunch, especially in India. So now you're in the perfect space to hear Hermann out, or people who want to sleep with just not having the video. You can leave your audio on. I'll keep playing something for you. And thank you once again, Pro Musicals, and welcome, Hermann. Welcome, Xavier. Thanks so much for doing this. Over to you, Hermann.
Yeah, thanks a lot, KG. Yeah, welcome everybody. So this is the second session we do. And again, I did prepare a little bit of a presentation that helps us through this because we're now going dig into technologies and Vitalizer, Transient Designer. So to give you a better understanding on how this came along, because there are some stories going along with this that I'd like to share. Yeah, and it probably you will understand it's not all about science. It's pretty much the opposite that leads to inventions. So I share my screen and hopefully this will work. And so share.
It works.
It works. And So, yeah, as KG was saying about SPL, in the very first days, the company was named Sound Performance Lab, and it was so long when we put it onto a little faceplate on a 1U unit. There was hardly any space for knobs. Yeah, that's a bit exaggerated, but it took away a lot of real estate on the front panel. And I was thinking, Jesus, now that why it's okay, let's take a 3-letter abbreviation. And I thought, oh no, not again a 3-letter abbreviation. We have enough of those. But turned out it's going to be SPL. Oh, I thought, hey, that's sound pressure level, isn't it? So we're going to be mentioned in every major publication, in every spec sheet, everywhere. It's going to lead to a lot of misunderstandings, though. But what the fuck? Let's do it. So that actually was SPL. And when I designed the logo, I was just like, forgive me, looking at Porsche and how Porsche spelled it, and the S is actually the S from Porsche, and the P and the L is a bit different then. But yeah, okay. Now what we want to do is we want to take a look first at the Vitalizer, because that goes back a very, very long time. So we go back to 1988, and well, this was the original SX2 psychodynamic processor. Actually, in that housing, it shouldn't be in there. It should be SX2 was an exciter with a surround or a 3D, an expander, like a stereo expander. So that was SX2 for dual channel. And then what happened was that we wanted to show this on the Music Messe in Frankfurt in 1988. And in January 88, we received a letter from AFEX. And they were distributed by AKG. So it was the lawyer from AKG who sent us a letter saying that we are infringing AFEX patent, which was just being published 3 months ago, and well, we didn't know it was published. So they were asking us to not produce this product, although we didn't know the product from AFEX from the inside. We knew what it was doing, but we didn't know how. We didn't know if we infringed the patent or not. But well, there were other companies making mock-ups of the oral exciter from Behringer, from Crystal, and other companies. They were making mock-ups, but we were the smallest of all of them because we just started, and we were afraid, and we were thinking, hey, if they're going to sue us, we're going to be dead. So, and I said to Wolf, hey, buddy, come, let's forget this exciter thing. It's going to all cause us only trouble, and let's do something else. Yeah. So what do you want to do? He said. I said, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe we just put everything on the table and we just play around, and we take the evenings and we fiddle with everything, and we just listen to music. And if anything weird happens, we're going to take a look at what it is. And he said, like, oh, okay. That's a weird concept. But you know, he said, I was just reading a book from Don Lancaster about filter designs. He said, and on the last page, on the very last page of that book, this guy was writing that theoretically, there are about 2 million different filter types possible. 2000s have probably been built so far, and only about 10 are in use. So he said there, he wrote, forget what I wrote here, just sit down, experiment, and find the others and see if there's anything happening. And I said to Wolf, yeah, brilliant. No, that's the mantra we need. That's exactly what we're going to do. So Wolf was building up this huge mono board. It was really huge, and it was like a rainforest of electronic components. It was just I didn't get it. There were just enough front panel controls and switches and internal trimmers that I was fiddling around with, not really knowing what I was doing. But that was not the reason, because it was like we were looking for a surprise. We were looking for something that really was different, and that doesn't come from thinking about it. It's pretty much when you do software, you need to program something, and if you are looking for something that surprises you, how can you program what will surprise you? It will not happen. So in software, there is no such thing as surprise in a positive way, because that's really rare that zeros and ones add up to something really weird without any plan behind it. But on the analog side, you can just feed stuff into the other and see what happens, and you can listen immediately. It's just there. You don't have to wait for an emulation of a process or something. You just do it. And so I remember we were sitting there this one night, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and we were listening to one of the records from Jennifer Warnes at the time, and it started out with these huge orchestral drums, and it did. And we had absolutely the worst playback system installed. Only chassis, no speakers. Chassis on wires in the edges of the room. So bingo. Because we were thinking, if anything happens on these speakers that is positive, you will hear it on any speaker on the planet. And therefore, it couldn't get any worse than this. So we were just sitting there listening to this playback, and it was, as you can imagine, those toms were sounding like tun, 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 tun. And Wolf was walking around with some of these things, and he was feeding stuff into one of the others, and it was Wolf, go back to. You're like, where does that come from? Solder it. I'm too tired now. Solder it. We're going to listen to this in the morning again. Next morning, we come back, we listen to it, and it's just like, it's still there. What is this? And Wolf said, I don't have a clue. I just don't know. I look at this. So we had like, I don't know, it were like probably like 7 or 8 pots, same amount of switches, similar amount of trimmers, mono. And we had this front panel, which we already paid for, not printed, but the holes were there. And we paid 2,000 marks for those, and we couldn't use them anymore. And we didn't have any money. So we said, we have to use those front panels. So, okay. So how many holes do we have per channel? Well, 4 and 3 switches. Is that all? Yeah, that's all. Wow. But so with a dual concentric, we could get like another one. Yes, we could get another one. That's the reason why it's a dual concentric, because if you think about it from now, it's so weird. So anyway, we took the next 2 weeks to only listen to music and to
that is your duty.
Guys, request to everybody else to please mute your mics in case you are there. Please mute your mics, everybody. Thank you. Sorry, Hermann, go ahead.
Not a problem. So we were then listening to music for 2 weeks, and we were trying to figure out how these all of these pots and switches and interact with each other. And we were thinking, okay, if we had like 2 things and we move 2 pots like this, or maybe like this, and it was like making sense when you listen to music, what that combination would do, we would just make 1 pot out of this. Some pots only sounded good in only 1 position. Fine, fixed resistor, done. So that's how we prodded along to get this. And finally, we had this product. And we went, and the result was amazing, because the comprising everything, spanning the time to put so many things on just 1 control, it was a weird concept from the get-go. And we introduced it in England in 1988, then in Frankfurt, then we went to the APRS show in London. And there, suddenly I saw people on our booth, and they looked at the product, and they were like, doing this. And I was like, why are they laughing? They were making fun of us. And I went to my distributor at the time. There were the guys from Audio Design, by the way. So Mike, I said, Mike, why are they laughing? You cannot write penetration on a front panel. Like here. I mean, I was just a very young guy. And I said, and I didn't know what that actually meant in English. And then they explained to me, and I was like, oh, all right, I'm going to change this. So it's now it's got intensity or something like that. But we found a guy in England, then later in 1991, Lewis Austin. He had a company called the Home Service, but he was actually a record, not a producer, he was a mix engineer in his former days. He recorded pretty much all albums from The Sweet and from Def Leppard. And he also recorded Ringo Starr and John Lennon in all in the 70s. So he's a super nice guy. And he stumbled upon the SX2 at the time, and he came over from London to see us, and he said, "This is a fancy box, guys. I've never heard anything like that. So can I do this and represent it? And I know all the studios here in England, and I'm going to put this to the market." I said, "Great." But yeah, and he said, "Can you make this, freshen it up a bit, give it a more fancy name and stuff like that?" I said, "Yeah, more fancy name. I would love to have a more fancy name." So actually, it was his wife, Diana. Louis said to her, "Hey, we need to have this a name for a product field, and we can't come up with one." And she said, what does it do?" "I don't know. It just makes everything come to life. It's just like you put stuff in there, and then when it gets out of it, you just wonder what happened. And it's so alive when everything is present and you can hear details and stuff. Well, then call it Vitalizer." And he thought about it. Yeah. And then he told me about that, and I was thinking about it. And I asked my American distributor at the time, and he said, well, Vitalizer. Sounds like something you put into your hair. Well, yeah, I can go with that. So that's how Vitalizer came along, and the penetration went away. So that's the harmonics control then. And later, well, this is the mastering version of it that we still make exactly as it is. And the 3 tubes in here are actually output tubes and a stereo buffer tube. The thing is that this creates a certain crosstalk that is pretty much emulating vinyl crosstalk when you engage this. And that is what people really like about it. You can switch the tubes to attenuation, but honestly, don't do it. That is the only thing that really doesn't do any good. For the rest, we added compressors in the top and the high end. We changed the filter center frequencies for the soft and the tight bass. I don't want to go into what all the knobs do, because that's, as KG said right in the beginning, you need to play with it. That's all pretty interactive. And to show you this, how complex that actually is, I want to show you what we then later got as a patent. You probably wonder why there is so much time in between, and that from the invention to the patent, there were like 14 years in between. The thing was that when we came up with this, I was immediately looking at the patent law, but we didn't have any money to pay for these things. So I was just thinking, is there a way to protect your invention, but you can already sell it? And later on, you can go for the patent process. And actually, there is a way to do that. But what the patent law says is that your invention is actually not now it's hidden to the normal engineer. Let's call it engineer. So if a standard engineer cannot figure out how it does that, then you can patent it later. So what we then did, we comprised a certain section of the circuit in a little box, filled it with epoxy, had some circuit in there, and if you take that out, nothing would work. And in order to figure out what that actually is on the internal side, you would need to get rid of the housing and the epoxy, and this is stuff that a normal engineer would not do. So And later on, it proved when we went through the application process for the patent that all of this was correct, and we received the patents in the first in Germany, and then the years later, it's also in the US, in the main EU states, in China and in Japan. Now, this is the circuitry as it is in the patent. And that is actually giving you an idea of how wacko this filter actually is. This is not a serial filter, not a parallel filter. It is not a Linkwitz-Riley or not a Baxendale, Chebyshev, Butterworth, you name it. Those are just simple filters. This is a freaking complex thing. And I don't know why it works still after all these years. Now, you can see here, we have an input signal, and this is mono, and we split it into something that is being changed here and goes to a final mix output stage. The second thing has a drive control here, and then you have a 5-way split. So this 5-way split, there's one portion that immediately goes to the final summing stage. There is another portion that is being derived into some kind of another filter that is not only been fed by this one, but also fed by another trail that is coming from here with certain things that has been done to that as well. There is another one that is being inserted, split and inserted later after this stage, and then going into that box. And there is one that is split here going into, oh, excuse me, I just tapped something. My fault. What did I just tap?
You went back.
Yeah, I just hit something on my mouse here, and that was.
No, it's okay, Hermann. You just went back in time. That's okay.
All right. So I should be a bit more careful here. Anyway, so we have this another one. This part that goes in here, but it's also being derived going in here. When you look at it, you can probably imagine that you're not figuring out this as being a good design if you're not just stumble across it after you did wacko things with experimentation. That is not a brain thing. That's a result of an experiment. Now, and just to give you an idea, the original oral exciter is this. So the complexity is less. Now, Vitalizer, why does it actually sound as it sounds, and what does it do to the audio? Now, we start with something that we all have seen, and that's the, how do you call them? The equal levels of loudness? Levels of equal loudness. Yes.
Equal loudness control, yeah.
That means the lower the level, the more this contour is like non-linear, and the higher you go, the more linear it sort of gets. But we can see that dip here in the 3.5 kilohertz area, which is, it's the main reason where you improve intelligibility of speech and clarity and all of those things. We need this, obviously, as from our history of hearing, we have to hear this area extremely well. So even at the highest levels, this is emphasized, this area. Whereas above that, it seems that here above 10K, there is no real information in our historic development of our hearing in the brain. So it's not really relevant to hear that, and you would need extreme levels to make this audible. And if you go down below, you see that the bass range loses an extreme amount of power, or let's say, no, you need to hear the bass as loud as 1 kilohertz. If you're like in the lowest range, see there is a 60, 70 dB difference. That's enormous. And I'm not sure, when I saw this the first time, I was like, really? I mean, those Fletcher-Munson curves are around since 1929, 1930, Bell Labs from Fletcher and Munson, those two guys. But they're still valid. They added some stuff over here over the time. Now, when you look at the curves that the Vitalizer produces, the similarity is astounding. And actually, we were looking at these printouts, and then I said to Wolf, you know what? That looks like the curves of equal loudness, like the Fletcher-Munson curves in a way. So really, yeah, look at it. I mean, it has precisely the best dip at about here 3K in that area, which is pretty much here. It does do the same thing there, and then it goes up with does the same thing here, the same thing on the bass end, and below 50 hertz, it falls off. Well, that makes also sense, because if you emphasize that below here a lot, there is information that is consuming enormous amount of energy in your amps. But basically the reason for that dip is that the subsonic filter that we have in the Vitalizer, it has a center frequency of 50 hertz. Now, but when you increase that, it does exactly what you see here. So that was something where we just like, oh, that's interesting. So it adopts the hearing to the human sensation. That's nice. And just with that filter, with these little knobs, you do all of that. Crazy. So then we stumbled across something else that we really found interesting. And that is audio masking and demasking effects. Now, we all know that if you have like sounds that are layered above one another, that if there is a certain level between them, that you're not really perceiving what is below. And in terms of punch and boom, which is in the bass end really, really the important part, if the punch is less than the boom, you just don't hear the punch anymore, and that's not good. But what the Vitalizer does is that it changes the moment, or it shifts in time the event that is the loudest. The loudest event gets the highest shift in time, and that's dynamic. That's not like a preset in a device. You probably know from BBE, the sonic maximizer. That's a 3-band approach, and it has like time shifters between the low and low mid and the mid high band, and those are fixed. But it's this, but we're doing the same thing, but everywhere across the frequencies, dynamically controlled by the actual level of the audio. So this is another proof why you don't invent this by thinking about it, because when you look into the literature, they say that this is not possible, that a phase shift is random to amplitude change and not correlated. And the Vitalizer correlates phase and amplitude shift. So suddenly you hear the punch, and slightly later, the boom. And when I say slightly, those milliseconds, we're talking about microseconds to 1 or 2 milliseconds. It's not a delay. A delay is 17 milliseconds and higher. So we're in micro timing. But for the brain, this is enough to differentiate. Now, when we go for another thing on the masking effect, we all know when people talk about compressed audio, MP3 and stuff like that, that they use technologies where you detect the audio events that are below the threshold of hearing, and this information is being used to reduce the data because you don't hear it. Well, turns out when you run those through a Vitalizer, and you take the original and the MP3 and you run both through a Vitalizer, suddenly the MP3 file sounds extremely empty, because due to the phase shift that it applies to louder signals, the formerly masked events get demasked. And that's where, when you have good recordings where people say, oh, I hear so much detail, suddenly I hear 5 cymbals and not just 3 different cymbals, or all of these effects happen with this kind of, well, what the Vitalizer does without we don't know why. It's part of that weird concept. Luckily, when we applied for the patent, we didn't need to explain how it works. That's a good thing on a patent. You say, yeah, that does that. Yeah, it does that. Great, isn't it? And they don't ask how, luckily. So Now we can take this a step further, and we can take at multiple events that are layered above one another. So when we go for mixing, we all like to add sounds on top of each other to make them more solid, more alive, more, or to create the sound we actually want. And we always stumble across level. And there are, especially in digital, you have the feeling that you just slightly modulate the level of one, suddenly you don't hear the other anymore. And is a trade-off that you do. And then you put it into a mix with a different content or with more signals. You go like, oh shit, now I don't hear it again. And you have to go back and work on that. With the Vitalizer, this is this is happening. It actually spreads out the events according to their maximum levels. That's so nice. And it does that dynamically, adaptively, automatically. It's just like a wonder. Now, I remember that back in the days when we put this product to market, and we didn't know this. So what you see here comes all later from research on what actually happens with individual signals. And we try to make visualizations of that so that we have an understanding of this. People actually didn't really like to talk about that they use the Vitalizer. And maybe that is also applied to other products like Sonic Maximizer or the Aural Exciter from Aphex, because I have the feeling that well-trained engineers don't need those better maker boxes. No, I know how to use an equalizer. I don't need this. And I always find this a bit weird because this is an equalizer. It's probably the most advanced or weird equalizer there is. And it does things no other equalizer does. And when I look at our sales, especially on the software side, the Vitalizer is it's probably behind the Transient, or with the Transient Designer. They both battle the strongest plugin we have. So people use it a lot and massively, but they hush it up. They not talk about it because they still think, I don't say that I'm not a proud user of a Vitalizer. You use one of these boxes. But I hope to give you a better understanding. And believe me, I don't understand this thing fully. Neither does Wolf. It remains a mystery to us in a way, but it works. It is there, and it does splendid things. All right, so that is the Vitalizer. Does anybody have questions on the Vitalizer? Please now. Then I would start looking at the Transient Designer.
Yeah, I do have one question. Till what extent can one make the manual changes after hearing the output in aspects to removing some part of the audio or as a whole? Is that possible? And sorry, I'm not pro. I was just curious. Ignore if it's a bad question. There is never a bad question. Only bad answers.
Yeah, and here comes one. I don't know. No. Don't think of this as an equalizer where you just say, okay, I have a frequency here and that is annoying, so I notch it or I just cut it. You don't have that access to specific frequencies. I would call more, think about it as what people would say a program equalizer. So it applies a certain curve, but not just a curve. With this curve comes this adaptive dynamic control of amplitude that decides upon how the events layered after their increase in level are being perceived. I remember that I was one of our good customers on this is Bob Ludwig. You probably know this man. He's really one of the top class mastering guys on the planet. And I asked him why he's using it for, what he's using it for, and he said, Hermann, it does magic on old tapes from big bands. There you have huge amount of information, usually not mic'd in the optimum way, and then you only have a stereo down file from tape of it, and you should do a remaster of that. How can you grab certain instruments in there and or correct something in there without affecting so many other things. So working on this in the traditional way is always a trade-off between doing something good and harming something other. And it's a difficult process. And he said the Vitalizer is just spreading up my audio universe. I just literally could pick certain instruments out of there. I just really know where it is. It's easier to pinpoint, and if you EQ this afterwards, you get finer results too. I remember one story. We also sold this to hi-fi people in the beginning, and we had a company, MB Quad, who was our licensee for that, and they asked me to promote this to the press people in Germany from Audio Magazine, the biggest magazine at the time, early 90s or 93 it was. And I was sitting there in that room, and they had like 100 grand speakers and Mark Levinson all over the place, and it was just like, wow. And I went in there with my little 2000 D-Mark, so 1,000 euro box from MB Quad labeled, and put this on top of a Mark Levinson preamplifier for 27,000. And I was like, Jesus, I should make something better in here. Oh, and so I was sitting there and I was playing around, and they asked me, okay, Mr. Gier, what music do you want to listen to? I said, I don't care. What would you like to listen to? Oh, well, usually guys that show me something, they come in here and they have with this track, it works really well. I said, no, we're from the pro side. We need to work with any track that comes along. We don't have that. And if it doesn't do that, it's no good for us either. Oh, okay. Yeah, select what you like. So they took some stuff that they had and I put it on, and I was playing along with that. And it was like, whoa, yeah, that's nice. I like that. So I A-B'd it. And they were like sitting there, A, B, A, B, no reaction, nothing. And like, shit. That's a big difference. That's a big difference. They should actually say something about it. And then it dawned on me, oh, they are used to listening to differences on cables and stuff like that. This is a different universe to them, and they don't comprehend what's going on there. Ah, okay. And I thought, all right, I see that you're not getting it. That's fine. Do you have like a live recording with applause on it? And then just the applause, nothing more. And I said, why you want to listen to that? You're gonna see that. Just take applause. So that I think it was like from Sting, from Bring on the Night or something. There was a long passage where people were applauding. So we were A/B looping this and played that. And I put the Vitalizer on exactly as we had it before, same position. And before I switched it on, I said, okay, now, when I switch this on, previously, you will hear just the clapping. And it sounds like raindrops on the roof. It sounds like a noise floor. It sounds like pretty undefined noise, but rainy noise. And when I switch it on, you will be able to differentiate women and men, the clapping of women and men. And you will pinpoint in the room where the man is standing clapping and where the women are standing clapping. You can differentiate that. And they went like looking at me like, sure. I put on the button and this is a man. And they stood up and went like, holy, So I said, okay, now put on your music, leave the setting. I will go for lunch. You play music and I'll be back in 2 hours. And then we can talk about it. Yeah, we got the Golden Ear Award after that, which was the highest award you can get from the hi-fi people at the time. And they were like raving about it, making huge auditoriums about blah, 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 fancying this as the biggest shit there is. So what can I say? I mean, it just happened this way, and it was never intentionally done. This is one of those things. And another thing, okay, Transient Designer is one of these other things that shook the world. And this design is being done by Ruben Tilkner. He was a young engineer, and he worked with us for 10, 12 years. And then he went off and founded his own company, and this is Elysia, which you may have heard about. So Ruben, in his young years, he's a keyboard player, and he came to us. I think it was 96, yeah, 96 about. And he invented the Transient Designer, and he called it Kickman at the time. And I was looking at it, and I remember we were in this very first little building where we were in, and he said, "Hermann, can you come along? I have to show you something." And I looked at it, and I played with what he had there, just 2 buttons. And just, yeah, if you want to have more punch and kick, just turn this one. If you want to have more sustain, turn this one. And if you want to have less of this, turn it the other way. And I played with this, and wow. I've never heard anything like this. This is cool. This is not a compressor. No, it's not a compressor because you don't need a threshold. Yeah. And it doesn't do compression. It is, so I called it, the Transient Designer name was then something that I put on the table. And over the years, there were so many companies literally copying that, like Waves did the Trans X plugin, and there were so many other companies, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 companies coming up with something similar. We did various versions as well of this, the dual channel one, but later also the rack pack module. And from the rack pack module design, we created all of the plugins. In 2015, we added we came up with a Transient Designer Plus that had a parallel mix feature and output control and a peak stop, because in the digital domain, the added attack would be too much to handle and you get internal peaks. So we had to take precaution there. And also in 2015, we came out with the 500 series module, and there we added the parallel mix control as well. That was actually really helpful because you can drive higher attack levels and get that sound, but only mix a portion of that sound to it. So that was really nice to do. Now, we dig into how this actually works. And let's start over here. Now, this is our original waveform of the audio. Okay. And we have 2 envelope generators in the Transient Designer. One that is tracing the surface of the waveform. And second one that has a fixed slow attack waveform. Now, this area here, so we actually subtract envelope 2 from envelope 1. And this gives us this voltage curve over time. And this voltage curve is being put into the VCA, and this equals the control voltage of the VCA. So that's really a simple thing to do, but it's genius to think about it this way. And now when you increase the attack and thereby the amount of control voltage, the attack portion rises. According to the music, there is no such thing as a threshold or an attack or a release control, because all that information about attack and release time is being embedded in the curve itself, as it has been traced from the original waveform. So that was just ingenious to do it this way. And thereby you just had a control that by putting more of this voltage into the VCA, it would only emphasize the attack portion. And if you reduce that level, it would decrease that attack portion and it would soften the attack. Now, it is very similar to what happens to the sustain side. So on the sustain side, there is this tracer, envelope 3, and there is another envelope generator that has a prolonged sustain, and that's a fixed prolonged sustain, so that we have like a reference. We subtract the envelope 3 from the envelope 4, and the envelope 4 from the 3, and we get that control voltage, again mimicking exactly the behavior of the original waveform. And now you can boost that or you can decrease that. Actually, boosting works as if you like put a new reverb onto something. But the cool thing is, if you already have a reverb on something and you recorded a room and there is room information on it, on a snare or whatever, and you want to prolong that, yeah, you all know how long it takes to find a matching reverb that doesn't conflict with the original room sound. And actually, you are looking for the same room sound because that is the one that you want to emphasize. Otherwise, you need to get rid of the room before you apply a different one. So with the Transient Designer, and you just take the sustain and drive in more sustain, you get the longer, the reverb flag of that original room. One knob, one twist, done. And the same allowed if you say, okay, I have a lot of information in the reverb flag on my, or reverb tail, sorry, on my on a snare, on a kick or whatever. You're going to reduce the sustain, and thereby you effectively deverb that information until it becomes totally dry. I remember I was presenting this to an AV place in London, and they were like doing film, audio to film and movies. And the guy said to me, all right, now give me this, you hear this door slam, right? Okay, here's the door slam. Boof. Okay, make it sound as if it's standing in the open on the top of a snowy hill. What? What does that mean? On a snowy hill? Oh, I get it. There is absolutely no reverb at all. It's absolutely dry, and you would just hear a distant slam with nothing else. So I had this sample of this door slamming, and it was really close, and it had this narrow thing. So okay, a bit of Lassie Tech would do. That would get the punch out of the door, and you would think it is further away because of that. And then you take the reverb off like as far as you can go, and then it would just be like donk, a dry slam. And I did that, and he said like, wow, yeah. And it took you like 3 seconds. Okay, can we buy this? Right. So this is Transient Designer, and we go to Atmos. But okay, let's stop here. If you have some other questions on Transient Designer, please go on.
So far, I do not have any written questions. So maybe
that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, also in '98, so that was a pretty intense decade for us on inventing stuff. With the advent of surround audio, we were like really enthused about that, and we really wanted to be part of it. So we started to, you probably know Brauner microphones. Yeah, and Dirk Brauner, his company is just about 100 kilometers away from us, and so yeah. We always had good relationships with each other. And I said to him, hey, Dirk, what about we're gonna take your VM1 capsules and 5 of those. And we use this array. It's called the INA5, ideal. It's the ideale Nierenanordnung in German. It's from 2 German guys. And they had, from experimentation, translated it means the ideal cardioid array. And they had like figured this setting, as you can see it here or here, they figured this setting out and in tests with people, that they were like placing them on a stool, on a chair, and they were like letting people pass by in front of you. Because it is really complicated when you do these things that you don't feel that they are moving slightly around you. So in the surround field, so that they maintain like walking a line in front of you. That's really heavy to achieve in mic when you mic it. And they came out with this setup. And we were picking up on it because they were making it official, and we were at the time working with like a circle, and so did Neil Young. I was on one of the AES shows. Neil Young came to our booth, and he saw this, and we spoke about his experiments, and he said, yeah, I was using tape reels and other round things, and I was putting microphones to tape reels in just to experiment with surround. So also a good approach at the time. Yeah, anyway, they had all cardioids on those, but Dirk had omnis in there, and we made, with this matrix over here, you could remotely control all of the polar patterns. You could also move the heads like 90 degrees left and right, so 180 degrees spin. You can also extract the rears if you want to. Now, surround, and still today, and still, there's one thing that never really took place, and that is recording in surround. We only record in stereo and in mono, and then we use that information to place it into some algorithm, or we mix it into some channels, and we add some reverbs and stuff like that, or ambient. The problem is that when you listen to the playback, the room always happens away from you. There's the speaker, and there is information from the reverb flags that goes to the behind. And there is another speaker over here and there and there, and everything goes away. That room in between where you are actually in is pretty much an empty room. And when you, because the reason is, there is no such thing as a relation between what the front left speaker and the rear left speaker would be having picked up in reality. So with this main microphone in surround, and that which that is, you have like this inner circle that where each microphone picks up information here, but this back here picks also information up that comes from that side. Every microphone picks up information that arrives at its place in time. And when you drive in those faders, you feel like the whole, that you are being placed into that room, and you're part of that room. It's a goose pimpling experience. I remember that Ronald Pren in Galaxy, he was mixing a live show in the Cologne Arena with 15,000 people, and he had like a setup where you had 5 microphones on the ceiling of that arena, and a decker tree, a huge decker tree in front, and in the upper rows there were like another circle, 27 odd microphones. And he said, and he called me up and said, Hermann, I got this mix on the desk. You need to come by because they have the Atmos tracks as well, and you need to listen to what it does when you just add those to all the other mixing. So I got into the car, and they're just about 1 hour, a bit more away from us. So, and I said, okay, and I listened to that without the Atmos. First thing, said, whoa, that's a big fat arena. That's really nice. Yeah, but where are you? He said to me. I said, yeah, well, I don't know. I'm like a ghost in this arena somehow. That's exactly what it is. Now then he drove in the faders, and the whole room came to you. Everything was there, but you were in there. You were in that room, and you could look around, and you could feel being there. That was really intense. He said, you have to microphone that part. If you don't, you cannot create this artificially. I've never found a way to do that. And that applies still to today. But the development in surround audio didn't really have the budgets to pay for these kind of technologies. So surround has not kicked off, surround miking has not kicked off. You probably remember the holophone and some other microphone arrays that are trying to be smaller and then more carryable, and then they could be powered by some kind of batteries to go somewhere you want. But you need to have that distance, and you need to have large membrane microphones to get the intensity. Yeah. That was the experiment on Atmos. Yes, and Atmos, actually we had Atmos trademarked. I said that said this the last time. But we left the trademark and didn't pay for it anymore in about 2012. And then Dolby picked it up, which is really right. And we're getting to the end of this. Because the Phonetic Matrix is going to be something where I'm going to do a special on when we talk about headphones in a later session. Just so for to tease you a little bit, headphone listening is becoming more, and headphone mixing on headphones is becoming more and more a thing. Back then when we designed it, it was just like me sitting here exactly in this room. My daughter was just 2 years old. She was sleeping upstairs. I was mixing the album of my band. And I couldn't listen on speakers because she was sleeping. So I need to come up with, I wanted to have a headphone. I used headphones and I used the standard headphone amplifiers and I couldn't. I simply couldn't. I was reading so much about how you need to get your head around the fact that when you have speakers here and you move them to that, what that actually means. And even further, you close to your ears so there is no travel from the one side to the other. There's no crossfeed. What that actually means, I didn't know. I was just playing along with my mixes, and I made my CDs, and I got into the car, and the next morning, the car was my reference at the time, put it in, drove to work, and I was usually just really disappointed of my job, and it didn't translate. So I was reading a lot about this, and I will tell you about this adventure in that specific session. I think it's in January. But it turned out that we came out with these parameters, and they were actually really working well. Now, that means that you can mix on cans. You can create an image on headphones like that translates to speakers. And today, it's even more important because now the whole thing shifts. Consuming music is now to 80% on headphones. And that has changed over the last years dramatically. So now the Phonetic Matrix is there to check your mix if it still works on speakers. So it's pretty much the opposite. You need it anyway in both cases, but you can make binaural mixes on headphones, and also you need to do that when you do Dolby Atmos. That's the one of the ways to actually check your to mix on cans, that you hear what your customers will hear. And then you can do your stereo and you can translate to speakers. So this goes both ways for the modern production of immersive audio on headphones, as well as standard stereo on headphones, as well as on speakers. Right. And to finally, just for the fun of it, I was telling you about this mastering console that we did back in 2000 for Galaxy Studios, which is the golden one. And we did also not many. I think we only did like 7 or 8 of these consoles, all in all. But they were like, it's already 8 channels. As I said, it's 120 volt rail, and it's, you don't see it, but in there are 176 audio channels in this thing. But I told you last time that I was sitting with Ronald, and we were designing this, and I found this again, the scribble, and I just want to share this because it's fun. So that was our original scribble of the MMC1 console when we sat at Galaxy Studio with a big paper and said, what should it do? And then we started to paint everything. And it's funny, it doesn't look, well, not the same, but there is a lot that we then later sort of exactly did like this. Yeah. Okay. That's it for me. And thanks a lot. And now we can, I stopped the sharing and we can discuss stuff if you want.
Yeah, I do have two questions actually. The first one is, how is phase shift managed in the Transient Designer? I've used stock envelope shaper in my DAW and usually get a very phasey sound, if that makes sense. I am not entirely sure what it is, but seems like a phase shift to me. And then another one that is quite linked to it. Another question from another person says, I have a similar question about the Vitalizer. Seems like it does amplitude-based microphase shifting, helping us undo masking. How does the Vitalizer respond to change in frequency?
To this question, I don't know. I don't know. We don't know. It pretty much does it. And I don't know why the filters behave like that, but the filters don't seem to not distinguish between frequencies. They're just reacting to amplitude pulses and then shift that amplitude of that specific frequency. But how does it detect those? We don't know. I'm sorry. I cannot really answer this. I wish I knew, but I don't. And the other one.
Hey, Hermann.
Yeah.
This is Ritesh here. I was the one who asked you that question. And this absolutely blows my mind. I'm like, I have a background in DSP. I'm a music technologist. So it blows my mind how you can design a filter without affecting the frequency, but just the amplitude and just, do that kind of micro phase shifting. That's mind blowing.
Well, I mean, when you're a DSP guy, well, I remember when we started to make this a digital filter, and in the beginning, well, that was a venture for all of us because there were recursive structures in there, and those are hard to implement, especially in the year 2000.
No way.
So. and I gathered some venture capital to finance us doing this, and I was talking to the guys at Spectral Design. This is the design team that did all of the plugins for Steinberg in Hamburg. Especially they were in Bremen, close to Hamburg. So I and one of the guys was their leading programmer, Andreas Marzokiewicz. And Andreas, I met him and we spoke about that. I gave him the original unit, the analog unit, and I told him all we knew about it, which, as you now know, isn't all there is to know about it. And he went and he said, like, okay, this is a task. And then I didn't hear anything from him for like the next 3 months. And I think it was even longer than half a year that I was calling his boss, Jörg Huppert from HDA Audio. He was the guy who did the CubeTech amps, the CubeTech computers for restoration and stuff like that. So very knowledgeable person. And I asked him, hey Jörg, what's happening with Andreas? Well, Andreas almost quit. He went on vacation, and he was close to burnout. He said, not because of us. Yes, because of you. I didn't know. No. So I spoke with Andreas when he returned, and he was in good health, luckily. I said, what happened? I said, Hermann, I got so frustrated about this. I didn't know where to start. It all came back and forth, and it didn't. I mean, I have to look at it in a sequential type of manner when I program it, but because things need to happen one after the other, and I need to have time in between to process. So, but what you did there is like, but how did you manage to get something going with this? And he said, well, that was actually, I was climbing in the Black Forest. That was my last resort for my brain, just do something totally different than programming. So I went climbing, and I was just climbing up that one hill one day, and while doing it, I was close to the summit. I just knew how to do it. it just dropped into my, no, this is the way. So I immediately went down. I didn't go to the summit. I was so excited. I got down and I drove back. I stopped my vacation. I drove back to the company, started working on it. And this is what I'm going to show you now. And that was the first implementation of that Vitalizer as a digital software. Later, we also did we tried to be successful with licensing this technology to the car industry and to also to speaker manufacturers of flat screen TVs, because they had real problems with the sound. The flatter the speaker, the screen, the flatter the sound. But these are all stories for a different time, long stories. And I had one Russian guy. He was making this for a specific chip that we were pitching for the iPod Nano 2 from Apple, or that company was pitching, and they want as a mixed signal DSP, and we wanted to be, or they wanted us to be part on that chip because that was the most powerful audio tuning tool there is, also for them. So we had to pay somebody, and this was this guy from Berlin, from DSP Technologies, and he said, "Oh Hermann, this is a complex filter. It's a 8th order type of," and he used some terms I've never heard in my life. You probably could know that, but I forgot about it. 8th order something, but he managed to get this going. Not as good on a little tiny chip. It worked. It was better than anything that was on there so far. But with Apple, the story was that Apple had a rule that a new component that they would put into a product needed to be in the marketplace to buy for at least 6 months. And the Austria Microchip, where we were on, won the shootout, but we didn't get the deal because the product was in the market for 3 months.
Okay.
Well, the good side is, if that had happened, we wouldn't be talking today, I guess. And later on, I mean, that Nano 2 was the big success for Apple, and then iPhone followed, and everything went screen-based. And you can see they didn't have any interest in audio anymore at that point. Everything went to like improving the screens, getting games on screen, on smartphones and all of that. All the resources that were there were just for the picture. And they had no interest in that. Now, this other question that I'm just reading it here. How is phase shift managed in the Transient Designer? I've used stock envelope shaper in my DAW and usually get a very phasey sound, if that makes sense. Well, I don't know what you mean by stock envelope shaper. Is that somebody else's plugin that does it? Because I don't actually know what others do when they try to emulate what we do. Did you try ours and that makes the same problem in your application?
Who asked that?
Who is it? This is Vipul. Is he
Vipul
still with us?
I don't know if he's with us.
No, I don't see him in the list anymore.
Okay. Well, I cannot.
Oh, yeah, yes, I see him. Yeah, he's still there.
All right, there he is.
Okay, cool.
Yes, Vipul.
Am I audible? No, not.
Yes. No. No.
Talk.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah, great. I hear you.
I'm sorry. There was some disconnection mic chain. Yeah. So basically, I just used the stock of Cubase, the stock Transient Designer of Cubase. I didn't get the chance to use the SPL one.
That's not ours. That is not ours. They mocked it up. They did. I don't know what they did. No. But try to use the Plugin Alliance gives you 14 days of free trial, and that should be enough to check out if that does the same thing. And if you come back to me in one of the next sessions, because we're going to do this until mid-January, then you can share your observations, and maybe we can dig deeper if ours does the same thing, because I'm not hearing, honestly, phasing was never an issue with the Transient Designer, and it doesn't create that phasey sound. To me, it would make sense that you mix, I don't know, but that would be if you have a wet dry sound between the processed signal and unprocessed signal and there is processing in between, there is always a little time in between. And if the compensation is not really doing the job perfectly, you get phasing.
Yes,
but that would happen with pretty much any process where you mix dry and wet and you don't have proper compensation on the timing, not just with that product. So something probably that we need to dig it into a bit deeper to figure out what that is.
Hermann, I think the question was also related to the Vitalizer, because I don't think the Transient Designer would exhibit something like a phase shift in that sense, but a Vitalizer, which is actually, like you said, doing unmasking, which means it's doing a micro time domain shift.
Yeah,
that might introduce some phase, and that's for people who actually are into designing and who are into DSP, like Ritesh said he is. It would be very interesting for them to figure that out, because that's the toughest part about time domain work in DSP is the phase part of it, and that's what they were asking.
I've seen that question here in the chat as well. First of all, the time that we're talking about is pretty much in the single to triple or 3 to 5 sample period where we're shifting. So you will not even see it on a phase meter, and specifically not on an overall audio, because that is just like too specific on individual frequencies. But what I don't know, and I don't think they did that in the translation on the digital side, that they like make a Fourier analysis, take all the different frequencies, then shift them all around, and then pack them all together, because that would end up being a total mess. And with the filter that we have built in, they are extremely wide shaped. So they cover a range of, like, I don't know, 3-4 octaves, 3 octaves, but the fact that it demasks that you have, well, it's maybe it is just from my explanation also a bit misleading, that I'm trying to differentiate individual frequencies that are being popped up by or treated by an increase in level. Because I don't think that the Vitalizer internally really picks an individual frequency. It just shifts that moment of loudness, whatever frequency that is. And it doesn't look at, oh, this is 200 hertz. No, it doesn't do that. It just says, oh, this is loud. So louder it is, the more I move it away. And the funny thing is, we have 2 bass colors on this thing, a soft and a tight bass. Now the soft bass shifts this event backwards, and the tight bass shifts this event forward. That's all there is that creates the different sounds. And but the soft bass also makes a much more canceled mid section than the tight bass. So that's why people use the soft bass for individual treatment. When you do a double bass, and you apply, or you have a string stuff, for example, you need to try that. That's really awesome, especially on double bass on big wooden instruments. My brother is a professional double bass player, so I recorded him a lot, and therefore I know, and I also know how this thing sounds when you hold it to your body. It's just, if that vibrates, and when I hear it on a record, I can only hear pretty much the fingers knocking the strings, and they're jumping back on the fretboard, and that kind of sound with a bit of a bass underneath is then the double bass. And I go like, oh no, that's not a double bass, really. This is what's been left over when you mic it from like a meter away. But if you feel it, wow. And that is something that you can do with a soft bass on a Vitalizer. Take a sample on a double bass and in a mix, and apply a bit of that to that track.
Cool. That sounds like an idea, Hermann.
This is amazing. This really is amazing.
I think we have enough instruments, especially in the percussion section in India, particularly, which have a lot of low-end energy, which would be really interesting to try this on.
Oh yeah,
sounds like I can come back with that.
Yeah, please share some thoughts on this. That's going to be cool.
Maybe Sudhin, we should do some experiments on this, and maybe create a A/B kind of scenario in terms of samples, what they sound like before and after. That would be quite interesting actually to do.
Yeah. I remember that in the early 90s, we've been not really selling, or we've been selling, but not to the dealers. And we found out that some of the dealers actually had the Vitalizer connected under the desk to the keyboards. And they were running the keyboards through it and then on the headphones. And that was cheating in the purest fashion. But I said, what? I only got to know this years later, and I was just like, oh, no wonder that they hushed it up that they even used it, and they were not selling it because it was whatever.
They didn't want people to know the secret.
Yeah, I so many weird things around this thing.
Xavier, do we have any more questions?
Yes, I do. Yeah, just maybe the last one, maybe one from Ritesh.
Mm-hmm.
What are your comments on UAD's Vitalizer implementation? How analogy is it?
The Vitalizer implementation from Universal Audio is the implementation that we are using on the PA, on plug-in lines as well, because it is a plug-in lines product that is now is put on the Universal platform. The code differences there are code differences because the Shark platform that UA is using, I think it's a 32-bit fixed point, whereas we're using obviously a floating point, and there are differences in calculations that might also be that will create differences in sound. So that's basically where the format or the DSP that it runs on puts its limitations on. The Transient Designer on Universal Audio is not SPL. This is their own mock-up. And I remember in 2006, I guess it was, that I was talking to the guys from Universal because I wanted to ask them if they wouldn't be happy to get the Transient Designer. And I was talking on an AES in New York with Matt, the CEO at the time. And Matt says, funny you ask. We just have it built in our precision instrument line, Transient Designer. Oh, I said, you too. Okay. But wouldn't it be nice for you if it has an SPL on it? I said, let me think about it. But I think, that would be really nice. Would you approve it? I said, yeah, I approve it. And I got their things. We changed little on it, what they already did, because I never heard, it wasn't the full Transient Designer as an analog, but that was the beginning of going digital. So for what I heard, I said, that's cool. For the money they charge for it, for the instances that you can run with it, that's okay. Later, we offered them to take the Transient Designer from that we originally made for ourselves, that we are selling on the Plug-in Alliance platform. But they don't want to do that because they say we have too many customers that are already used that plugin in their sessions, and if we now do something else, there's no recall. So, well, yeah, it could be a different version, and they can just have their original version with that, but they didn't want that. Maybe they also didn't want the comparison. I don't know. But for the Vitalizer, that was your question, that is the same, except for the platform differences. But it's our code.
I see. That's awesome. So, but it's still a digital implementation. It just runs on their onboard DSP.
Yeah.
For UAD. Okay.
UAD can talk about analog as long as they want. They are digital.
Fair enough.
Point.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So, Xavier.
No, I got no other questions on my side.
All right. Cool.
And I think yep.
Thank you, gentlemen, Hermann, for your beautiful stories, man. I mean, each product has such a wonderful history and a story behind it. And you're such an amazing storyteller, Hermann, I must say.
Thanks.
You just make it sound so interesting to just hear you. Even, a large part of it is not so technical. And it just makes for such an interesting hearing. And I must say, I heard for the first time a word, goose pimpling. I mean, I'm going to kind of store it away. Goose pimpling experience. My God, that's a new word for me.
Isn't it? I thought this was a word that English people would actually use, wouldn't they?
Not in India.
Not in India.
All right. Really, but yeah, goosebumps, goose pimple. There's the goose pimpling. Oh, that's an interesting one. So I got that noted down. And the other thing which I think everybody's going to take away from here, Hermann, if I may say so, and I quote you on it, is that now we have another synonym for penetration, and that's called harmonics. So thanks, Hermann, for that one. At least, definitely, you contributed the English lexicon as well there, even though you're from Germany. So I must say that's a huge effort, what you guys have done. But jokes apart, some wonderful insights into the devices that you guys are making, even on the digital front. But devices which some of us use sometimes, even, as engineers, we end up using devices sometimes even without thinking. We kind of have heard about it. We kind of have heard other people using it or talked about it in various articles, forums, or whatever. And we end up using it without thinking sometimes, and after a while, it becomes just a habit of throwing a Pultec or a Neve or an SPL in just because we've heard about it. But just to get an idea what's going on behind that engine, which is working and how it's doing it, is actually an eye-opener. It's like knowing something in detail, because then you can apply it anywhere rather than just knowing how to use that device. So that's the kind of insight which hopefully these forums and these talks with you, which Pro Musicals is organizing, is going to give all of us. And really thankful to you and Xavier to take out so much time and talk to us and be with us. And you're going to be there for a good half part of next year, January as well with us. So thank you once again, guys, for your lovely stories and time. Thank you, Pro Musicals, for organizing this for everybody. And for everybody else, please stay safe. It's not gone as yet, if you might think so, but the thing is still hanging around. So be safe, follow the SOPs, keep your distance, wash your hands, and whenever you're going out, wear your mask, please. That's all I would like to say. Thank you once again, everybody. Anything else, Sudhin or Xavier? Anybody has to say? Vivin?
Well, I just thank you all for attending. It's very precious to us, and thank you, KG, for your everything, for being you. It's really cool. Just a small reminder: the next session, the 3rd on the 8th, the next session will be next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central European time. So Sudhin and Vivin will probably communicate about that, and Hermann will talk about the Series 1 and the monitor controllers. So it sounds simple, but it's not. And it's as usual, it's very interesting when Hermann is talking about it. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, guys. And stay safe. Have a great weekend. And hopefully we see us next week again.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Take care, all of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.